Um, it's really interesting as far as I'm concerned, because I'm trying to find things to talk about that interest me, or I've got a bit of interest in myself, and that would interest you. And I just thought, well, we're entering March, we've entered March, and the idea of being mad as a March hare came to mind. I thought, well, why not take that as a topic? Because we know in the pagan community, in the pagan world, that hares are rich in symbolism. That's hares spelled Hares, not hares Hairs, of which I'm losing many of them. So let's have a look. Mad as March hares. You will all know that the character of the March hare, or the crops up in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, where it's a rather interesting character. But actually, Lewis Carroll was building on the concept of a mad March hare that was, that predated his work. In fact, they were mad before 1865. The first recording that we recorded written work that we have about March hares is from about the 1500s, when we've got this wonderful poem called Blowball's Test. And the original poet said, they begin, I can't even do the ancient English, but they begin to swerve and stare as brainless as a March hare. Which is kind of interesting. And then there's another reference from Sir Thomas More's poem from 1529, as mad, not as a March hare, but as mad as a dog. So apparently dogs can get madder than March hares. What I find interesting here is that this concept of the mad hare, or the hares being mad, it just has a long history, certainly in Britain. And where does that come from? Well, it's been suggested that it's the hare's behavior in the mating season, which is rather odd and strange, apparently, that makes people think they've gone bananas. A lot of jumping and boxing, and they seem to have no reason for it. They're known to human beings. There's a certain kind of arrogance there, isn't it? Just because we don't know what they're up to doesn't mean there's no meaning to it. They obviously have a meaning, but these March hares, these hares do this kind of mating behavior through to May. But maybe the mating season starts in March, and that's when people first noticed it. And if you think about it, it's the time of year when everything is springing back to life. So the hares boxing in the fields was probably a good sign that summer was on the return. I saw a hare yesterday, believe it or not, when we were driving around. I wasn't yesterday, it was 2 days ago, driving around sort of the moors, and there was a hare. It wasn't a rabbit, it was a hare. I think I know the difference. And it was quite fun to see. He wasn't being mad. I think he was just a laid back hare, Cornish March hare, doing it directly. Before I go too much into the folklore bit of hares and rabbits, which is where we're going to go, I'd really like to just spend a few moments to talk about these quaint ideas of madness and lunacy. The term madness, which we know about, is comes from an old English word, gamede, which is out of one's mind, and the term lunatic actually sort of derives from the Latin and was often used for people that suffered epilepsy or diseases to be thought to be caused by the moon, hence lunatic. There's a mention in King James's Bible of lunatic in the Gospel of Matthew, which has been sort of decided that he was referring to epilepsy. The reason I put this picture here, and I think it's kind of worth reflecting on, we in our society, particularly, I'm going to talk particularly in Britain, have got a really terrible relationship with the idea of mental illness, madness, lunacy, insanity, or whatever, going from periods of time when we just couldn't understand what was going on with these people who were showing these kind of atypical traits, and treating them like animals, basically. And we all know that in the Victorian era, the vast mental asylums like Bedlam made a lot of their money from putting these people on show under terrible conditions. I'd like to say that we've moved on from that, but I'm just speaking kind of professionally now that I just know that the mental health or mental well-being and emotional well-being is still a big issue. And I still think there's a lot of stigma attached to it. So don't want to get that out of the way because we are going to use the phrase madness and lunacy and in historical context. But I just wanted to bring us all up to this kind of awareness that people are suffering from mental illness or poor mental health. And there's a stigma against it. I was speaking to a business owner yesterday who wants to do some work for his team, his staff, because he can't find a way to allow his workers to talk freely about their mental health. And he knows that they're suffering. And thankfully, he's far-sighted enough to want to bring um, somebody in to have a chat about that. So I won't go on about that. Oh, I've just noticed we've got 13 participants. Ooh. Anyway, so the sacred hare, most of you will be here because you'd like to know about the other side of the hare, the mythical side of the hare, and why some of you probably identify with it. And I know at least one person who actually has got a close affinity with hares who's on this group. And what's fascinating about the hare is that it's a religious icon, a religious sacred animal across many, many religions. Often the hare was associated with moon deities and also the symbolism of the wild hunt. In Irish folklore, it's very respectful of hares. Apparently, eating a hare in County Kerry was like eating your grandmother, apparently. And that therein lies some kind of hint as to why these animals are important, because there is a link here between ancestry and fertility and people that are giving birth to things, which is what rabbits and hares apparently do a lot. So they're sacred animals across the world, and we'll look at some more details in a moment. In Celtic mythology, the hare, because of its ability to dig into burrows, has a connection with the underworld, right? And so burrows of rabbits and hares that are found in sort of sacred places are associated with the underworld, and the animal itself has this connection that to this otherworldly place, the other world, which is interesting. And we know that in a lot of the certainly the bardic stories, anybody who falls asleep on a sacred mound or a Sid or whatever is liable to fall into a sleep and waken up in fairy realm. And the passage between the worlds could be symbolized by walking up the top of a hill, going under a hill, ponds, lakes, wetland areas, caves, and all those burial sites. These places were liminal places. They were on the edge of reality, and the hare and the rabbit could appear to go from our reality into another reality, which is one of the reasons I think they were seen as being quite sacred and quite special. We know that fossils show that the hares were in Ireland as far back as 28,000 years ago, which is a long time. And it's kind of interesting, and I'm not a biologist, so I'm not going to go into this, but it's quite interesting to see where the hare originated and how it spread. Now, the moon hare, and this is really fascinating, the idea of the moon hare or the moon rabbit is a mythical figure from Far Eastern folklore. It says Far Asta folklore, they're meant to be Far Eastern folklore. And it's said to be the moon hare because if you look at the moon and you look at the craters on the moon, and if you've got a clear sky on a full moon, one have a look. It is often said that you can see the hare in the craters of the moon, or the rabbit in the craters of the moon, and it gave rise to a whole host of folk traditions that started off in the Far East and slowly spread across the West. And so we find that there's a moon hare story or a moon hare connection at the root of so many of the traditions to do with the moon. And that's where the hare and the moon connection comes, which then gives you the hare and the goddess connection. I think this is really interesting because we can trace this moon hare story from China all the way over to South American Aztecs. And the interesting thing here is, whilst the trail runs from China through to Europe, seems to be a consistent trail, i.e., it's the same story, it is quite probable that the Aztecs developed a separate tradition at the same time about having the moon hare. We can actually see here in Chinese mythological white hare, that little symbol on the right, that drawing on the right, is actually an embroidered robe. It's part of an 18th century imperial Chinese robe, and it actually shows the moon hare making the elixir of immortality, which is fantastic. And then in a 16th century novel, we get Sun Wukong fighting the moon rabbit in a famous Chinese novel. And so this moon rabbit, this moon hare, really important in this culture. In the Buddhist tales, there's some wonderful stuff about the connection between the moon and the rabbit, and the special nature of the hare of the rabbit. There's a particular story where a monkey, an otter, and a jackal and a rabbit decided that it would be a good idea on a full moon, day of a full moon, to actually become charitable. And in that act of charity, they hoped they would actually gain some kind of reward. The animals came across an old man who was begging for food. And the monkey did what monkeys do, gathered fruits in the trees, and the otter collected fish, and the jackal found a lizard and a pot of milk curd. I don't know where lizards and milk curd come in. But the poor rabbit only knew how to collect grass. So the rabbit offered its own body by throwing itself onto the fire the man had prepared for the food. The rabbit wasn't burned, and the old man revealed that he was Sakara. In Buddhist tales, that's the ruler of heaven. And so, touched by the virtue of the rabbit, he drew the likeness of the rabbit on the moon for everybody to see. And the rabbit from that day forward was known as a special animal, the most charitable and virtuous of them all, because it offered to sacrifice itself for the good of the old man. It's a lovely story. And I can imagine sitting under a full moon and pointing out the rabbit to some kids and going, look, there's the rabbit. Do you know how the rabbit got there? And then telling them the story of the monkey, the otter, the jackal, all deciding to do good deeds and talking about what good deeds are. There are a number of deities associated with hares. Freya, the Norse goddess, she's the giver of fruitfulness and love. She's associated with Holder, the Norse moon goddess. Their animals are hares. Hermes, the Greek god of the spoken word, said to actually pass on messages quickly. And so the hares and the rabbit were actually associated with Hermes. And Venut, the Egyptian goddess, was a rabbit-headed goddess, a hare-headed goddess. And she's a form of Osiris. Again, there's a connection here between the other world. And she's often seen with the ankh and the scepter, which gives her the power. So we've got this connection to the hare going right the way back to Egyptian times, and they must predate Egyptian times, because that's when we started to write stuff down. I think in Britain, we can see that the hare and the goddess have been related for about 2,000 years or more, but they have different roles in different periods. The Iron Age people worshipped a goddess called Andraste, and she was associated with warfare. And it suggested that, because the Romano-British people were violent, and any association with hunting and with the way that the hare could fight, that was the connected association. In Wales, people worshipped Symolingel in that she could manage the use of the land. Sorry, I got distracted for a moment. Sorry about that. And she is the character that often gets depicted in memes of Ostara or Estra, the goddess Estra. So the goddess and the hare had a long connection. Okay, the goddess is feminine in this sense. I'm going to talk about Estra now, but next the next moot, I want to talk a bit more about her, but we have to be careful with Estra. The idea of Estra being related to Easter really comes from the Venerable Bede's writings in 725 AD. And he claimed that Easter was Estromanoth, which was the month, the pre-Christian spring festival, which may or may not be true. Recent research has brought some of that into question. And it may be that there wasn't a global or a national Estra goddess, but more of a local goddess, as many of these were. If you're interested, Exeter University last year published a paper on this stuff, which is really worth looking at. And what I liked in particular was that the last idea that Esther may be associated with local religious traditions in Kent, where she may have been a protective deity for sub-tribal social unit called the Estrawara, the Estra worshipping groups. And they're based around the village of Estri, one of the three English place names that share the etymological root of her name. So fascinating, fascinating. And to be quite honest, as we've spoken about before, it matters little whether we're inventing goddesses to remind us of that time of the year, or whether these goddesses have a long tradition. One of the comments we're going to come across in a minute is the fact that people have adapted goddesses and gods and ideas to fit the needs of society. In that way, religion serves the culture. It doesn't drive the culture. That's a contentious point, maybe. Some of you may have come across the Tinner's rabbits, and this is the image of three rabbits in a circle that are prancing around, or three hares in a circle. And we know that this motif appears in sites from the Middle and Far East to synagogues in Europe and in Devon, where they're known as Tinner's rabbits. This particular image is from a cathedral in the Rhineland. Now, I'll cover the idea of why they're called Tinner's rabbits, possibly. Some recent folklorists have decided that these are called Tinner's rabbits because the churches in Devon particularly that were repaired by miners who were, or people that ran the tin mines in Devon and Cornwall, and they had wealth, and so to ensure that they are remembered by the church, built these windows or these motifs and put them in churches. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the Tinner's rabbits are ancient. It's not just coming into medieval southwest England. They go back a long way. Now, there's something to notice on these two drawings. The one on the left is a carving on a church wall in Devon, and the one on the right is from a Far Eastern motif drawing that is much older. Notice in the center of that, you have the three rabbits in like a lotus pattern. We'll come back to why that might be important in a moment. And on the left, we have a better image of the three rabbits. Notice that the crescent moon is there. Notice that there are three leaves. And notice too that the hares only have three ears. The ears are connected. And in all of the ancient motifs, the tree rabbits, there is this weird kind of trisymmetrical arrangement where the rabbits share their ears, which may lead to an idea of what this is all about. The earliest occurrence of the rabbit motif is from the 6th and 7th centuries in China. Again, once something is committed, an idea is committed to something that we can read or see, it probably existed well before that time. In China, we see the same image in the 13th century in Mongol metalwork, and dated in, and again, and coins in Iran from the 13th century. And then we have examples of this rabbit motif occurring in reliquary boxes that were designed under Mongol rule and ended up in Germany. And then we have the motifs on 3 hares used in medieval or more recent European churches, particularly France and Germany. So the image on the right there is an example from Egypt, which kind of like, wow, yeah. However, as I've already mentioned, it occurs in the greatest frequency in churches in Devon. And this is quite amazing. You know, we've got this symbol that crosses the world from east to west, or west to east. Yeah, east to west, that's right. And they all seem to have this connection with spiritual places. We know that this particular 3 rabbit symbol with the connecting ears is similar to the Celtic triskel symbol, which are known from the sort of British Celtic metalwork. And in Devon, there are over 30 recorded examples of 3 hares appearing on roof bosses in the ceilings of medieval churches, particularly in Dartmoor, Whittingham-on-the-Moor, and Tavistock, where this photograph was taken. What I find interesting about this is these motifs, these carvings in English churches tend to appear in important places, above the altar, above the nave, above the entrance. So they're put there with a deliberate intent to symbolize something. And fascinating, the same symbol appears in Jewish synagogues in a similar place, the most important places within the church. So this symbol has a deep significance to the people that are that put them there. And so we come to the question of what is the symbol all about? Well, it's an endless circle. It's kind of eternity. It's almost like a never-ending cycle, isn't it? We have 13th century bell in the Cistercian monastery in Germany, where the symbol was believed to avert all evil influences. And in other places, the symbol is said to mean resisting temptation and confessing sins. The symbol appears in a 1309 Jewish manuscript, as well as several Ukrainian synagogues in later centuries. And of course, apart from carvings and artifacts, the symbol appears in the Book of Kells, the Celtic Book of Kells. So there is an importance to the symbol that maybe eludes us. The diagram here is of an Iranian trade from the Silk Road trade route in medieval times. And you can actually see this is a beautiful piece of metalwork. Which brings us on to why, how it got there. And the suggestion is that the early trade routes and later on the Silk Road allowed the idea and the symbolism of the hare to be shared across Asia and Europe, which kind of makes sense. But nevertheless, it must have held a deep significance for the people who carved it, who put it onto churches, or put it onto synagogues, that put it into artwork and important religious objects and artifacts. The idea of the Trinity is quite important here, because in Christian churches, maybe that's what this was all about. If the hares were associated with the feminine or the goddess in the past, the idea that the hare itself was could be shown as some form of Trinity. And my problem with that is that if it is solely about the Christian Trinity, why is it in so many other churches and so many other belief systems? Why is it in Buddhism? Why is it in Islam? There is this wonderful thought that because rabbits and hares were thought to reproduce asexually, yeah, where's the fun in that? Where's the maybe that's why they're mad in March. But there was this idea of the perpetual virginity, which again may have linked to the Trinity and also the Virgin Mary. In British churches, where we find the hare symbol, you're also going to find, in most cases, the green man symbol. Now, the green man symbol has been a lot written about, but I'm not sure whether there's anything fully authoritative about what the symbol really means. But when these two are found together, if you like, a masculine and a feminine, it may well be that the symbol has a deeper significance than we actually can articulate now. A significance that maybe we have lost because we're disconnected from when this symbol was written. There's an idea that the two together, the green man and the three hares, show the difference between the divine and the earthly nature of humans, which again is quite a nice idea. If we think about the green man and even the green goddesses as being nature and the connection of man to nature, we already know that certainly in Celtic mythology, the hare was seen as the creature that could move between worlds, and certainly found on the moon. So there is this wonderful connection between the limits and the growth of human beings and the ultimate divine. In a piece of interesting work by this guy called Gan Yuhai, who was a retired lecturer, he spent 50 years studying these images, particularly images in cave paintings. And he reckons that the motif could be taken to represent peace and tranquility, or to be. And he goes on further to say that these hares are found in lotus motifs, like one we saw earlier from the 13th century, could actually be, if you like, mandalas, meditative mandalas. And if we just look at this modern drawing of the three hares symbol, I can see, for me, how that could be a very powerful meditative mandala. The idea that the puzzle itself of what are the hairs are about, the fact that they're connected, what does that mean? The idea of the hairs being connected, of course, tends to link to the idea of not only three, the Trinity, but also the three elements, perhaps. The idea of the fact that we're all connected. Oh, and on that point, I'm just going to break off from hairs and share something with you, which is related to this motif. I went to see a film on Monday, and the film was called the Duke, and it's a British comedy about a guy in the 1960s who basically stole a painting of the Duke of York from a museum and held it to ransom. And what he wanted was the painting cost £140,000 at the time, and what he wanted was the government to put that kind of money, instead of into paintings, but into buying television licenses for old age pensioners who are on their own and for war veterans. However, I won't spoil the story for you if you want to go and see it, but there's a lovely sequence I mentioned yesterday to a group I was with, that the actor playing the character is in church, and they're having a conversation about why he decided to do this apparently sort of unselfish thing. And he said that he does these unselfish things because on his own, he is a brick and we're all the same. And so when he meets another person, they are a brick and they're a brick and somebody else is a brick. And he said that actually a brick on its own can't build a wall, but bricks working together can build a wall. And once you build a wall, you have something that's there, that's a marker point that can cast a shadow. Think about that for a moment. Without realizing it, there's a connection, for me anyway, between that Buddhist story of charity and the otter and the monkey, and the story of this guy who really was actually saying we're all connected, and the way we're connected and how we connect is important. And maybe that is the meaning of this symbol. the way we connect and the way we are connected is important. So maybe the symbol isn't something to really classify or identify or to find the single meaning for. Maybe the symbol is something more about finding what it means now for you, for me, for society. And, as I mentioned before we started tonight, with what's going on in the world at the moment, wouldn't it be nice if we could all stop and think for a moment about how we're all bricks that can build a wall together, how we are all connected, which is the Buddhist idea, or how we actually can be present in supporting each other. So the hare has this wonderful connection to the feminine, to the goddess tradition, mostly because the hares and rabbits are very reproductive. They produce a lot and they're connected with fertility. They have this other connection with the other world and journeying to the other world, and therefore they are sacred. The idea of them being sacred goes across religions and across time and goes right the way back to China. Um, so therefore, their interpretation of what these rabbits were wouldn't have been the same as what a Christian's interpretation of them would be. So I'm going to pause because I think that's all I need to say about this one tonight, because I'd like to open it over to you and make sure that this conversation and make sure these ideas are registered in some way. Before we go, I'll remind you that next week, 8th of April, and we are going to talk about Easter traditions, resurrection and rebirth is the title of the next one. But for now, let's sort of cut the screen, stop recording, and let's have a discussion.